listeners, I want to let you in on a bit of a dirty secret. I've put out over 30 episodes of Shark Tank so far, profiling some tremendous individuals, unpacking some fundamental ideas, but there's an ulterior motive behind all of this. I am in the last month of a very tremendous 11-year stint in Yeshiva and Kollel, and I'm starting my first job in September. And this has caused me a lot of anxiety and worry. And this whole podcast has really been a way to help me think about that, work through some of these issues, and prepare myself for the next step. So today we're sort of taking the gloves off because after profiling a number of individuals and unpacking a number of ideas, today I'm going to get myself some coaching. And I am so excited that Rav David Lapin, who was our last guest, and we profiled him in our last episode, has graciously agreed to coach me up a little bit and address straight on some of my questions and things that I am concerned about.
If you are not sure why Rav Lapin is the perfect coach for someone like me and probably someone like you, well, you probably haven't listened to last week's episode yet. There, we talked about Rav Lapin's 50 years of experience as a Rav, but also 50 years of experience in the business world. And he has a really sharp perspective on these issues, and I think he's the perfect person to give me some advice and perspective.
Hopefully, B'ezras Hashem, this will be a fruitful conversation that you will enjoy too. So, Rav Lapin, good morning, and thank you for joining us again on Shark Tank.
Thanks very much, Yaakov. Good morning. And I think no better way to help other people than to allow them to see you struggle with the issue and come to your conclusions and directions. What a valuable opportunities for your listeners. Thanks for being part of it.
So we're going to try to keep the discussion broad enough that will be relevant not just to my own particular situation. And I'll start with the very basic question, which I just alluded to, which is that Yeshiva has been very, very special. I loved it very much. You also, in our last episode, alluded to your very fond memories of Yeshiva years. And now I'm leaving, and it's a bit scary. My whole religious worldview has been built around the Beis Medrash and the Yeshiva and Talmud Torah, and I'm just a little bit concerned. So maybe you can help me address some of those concerns and give me some ideas that will give me a healthy perspective.
Yes, I think the first thing is even in the words that you choose, which are the words that most people in your situation would choose, the idea of leaving Yeshiva. There's problem number one. If you're thinking of leaving in Yeshiva, you're already in trouble. And if you think of how people talk about leaving university, they don't talk about leaving university. They talk about graduating, moving on, moving forward, moving into the next step. And somehow we've allowed ourselves to paint ourselves into a corner in a yeshiva perspective of, I'm in yeshiva, this is the ideal, this is perfect, and now I'm settling, I'm compromising, I'm taking a step down, I'm going to join the workforce. And it needs some reframing. And everything that I say is premised on the fact there are certain people who unquestionably should be in learning Torah 24 hours a day for all of their lives. That's where they make the biggest contribution to Klal Yisrael. But we're speaking about people like you and me who've decided that is an important part of what they do, but they're going to need to be doing other things too, and that leads you to this stage in which you're in. So the question isn't, whether it's a step down, am I leading? It's a question, is this possibly a step up? And that's what's important to frame it, because even though we don't paskin like the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah for everybody, there's not like a global psak in terms of the Rambam. But if you look at the Rambam's wording, and we'll look at some of it, its guidelines, there's a value in that. The value is a true value, whether or not we paskin that way, whether or not the Gedolei Yisrael decide that that's the psak for Klal Yisrael. But it's certainly a direction to take. It's certainly a value. And the Rambam says very clearly in Perek Gimel in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Ma'ala gedola hi lemי shehu mitparnes mima'aseh yadav. It's an incredible standard for one who gets his parnosa from his own effort. So for the Rambam, it's not a step down to go, it's not leaving yeshiva, it's not a step down to go into work, it's a ma'ala gedola hi lemי shehu mitparnes mima'aseh yadav. And it's important for you and people in your situation to adjust your mind to that. You're about to take on an incredible responsibility, an amazing opportunity to put your Torah in practice, to live Torah in such a way where you are independent. You're not taking, you're giving. And the Rambam just goes on to say how one is mezakeh people by doing it that way. And and then he goes on, or rather a little bit before that, he has said that kol hamesim al libo sheyasok b'torah v'lo yaseh melacha v'yitpanes min hatzedakah harei ze chilel et Hashem uvizat haTorah v'chiva me'or hadat. Anybody who thinks they're going to learn at the expense of others, that the community will support them in their learning, and again, I'm excluding those people whose greatest contribution to the world is through their learning and teaching and writing. But for most of us, anybody who thinks that they're going to do it that way, learn full time and take from the community, is causing chilul Hashem and is mevazeh Torah. Because what's important is, Yaakov, business is not inherently corrupt. There are corrupt business people and there are honest business people. But the business of Torah is inherently corrupt. When Torah becomes a business is a business and it follows business's rules. And if one follows those rules and the ethics of a business and the values of a business are pi halacha, it needn't be corrupt. But it's almost impossible for Torah, when it becomes money-centered, whether for an individual or for an institution, almost impossible for it not to become corrupted. I was once walking with Rabbeinu Finkel, the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir, in Mea She'arim, and we were standing and talking, walking very slowly. All of a sudden, he dashed away from me, ran down the street, and I'm looking and I see my Rosh Yeshiva from Kfar Hasidim is down the street. He's rushed up to him, puts his hand in his pocket, takes out his wallet, takes out a wad of money, gives it to him, and then comes back to me. And I said, Rabbeinu, what just happened? And he said, it's a Masori in Mir. When we see another Rosh Yeshiva, we make a contribution. We support their yeshiva. We've got to remember that our yeshiva is not the only thing in the world. You don't allow the yeshiva to become a business. You don't allow an institution to become a business, and for an individual too. That's what the Rambam's warning about. If you're going to make a business out of your learning, there's the opportunity for chilul Hashem. And therefore, you've got to be a hovet amlacha, usna'at harabbanut, v'chol Torah she'eni mamlacha sofa b'tela v'gurat avon. The Rambam is very strong on that. And again, whether or not it's psak halacha for everybody, but for you going into business, this is the Rambam to be learning, and this is what to have in your mind. It's important also just to align it with what he says earlier in Halacha Zayin. Don't take the view of, I'll first earn a living, I'll make some money, and then I'll sit down and learn Torah. Make your Torah central, and this is the piece of advice that's so important here. The Rambam's giving you the coaching. This is what's so important, is fit your business, your professional work into your spare time, not your Torah. Your Torah has to have kviyus man. Whatever time you're able to give to Torah, that's fixed and non-negotiable. In between that time and the other responsibilities that you have is a time for panos. And with that mindset, the importance of being able to integrate your learning and your working into one value system that is a ma'ala gedolah, that is a really high level, that's the way to move into the era that you're about to enter.
I like that a lot, and I want to follow up with a question. The ma'ala gedolah, the way I've always read it, is similar to what you mentioned last time, that the financial independence of a Talmid Chacham can be very crucial in allowing him the freedom to think and teach in the way that he sees fit and not be dependent on others. Is there more to the ma'ala gedolah than just that aspect of having enough money in the bank to be free to learn how I want?
It's certainly that, but I think it's also the point that I just mentioned of not allowing corruption. Which is very similar, which aligns very much with what you're just saying as well, because when you start modifying what you learn and teach for the sake of money, you're starting on the corruption. When you have somebody else to satisfy, something else to satisfy, then one's onto the possibility of chilul Hashem. And also the fact that people look at you as somebody who is taking from the community. So if your whole life is a life of Kedusha and you're learning and you're teaching and you're doing amazing things, people don't object. I find even some of the most Chiloni people, the most secular people in Israel, they get it, that we need some people who are doing just that. The problem is when they see B'nai Torah wasting their time and doing other things and going to parties and also then it's a Chilul Hashem. Now you're taking from the community for what? So one has to be incredibly careful with one's business. And ma'ala gedolah, that ability not to be beholden to the community for supporting one, just enables one to live a lot more calmly. And that's part of the ma'ala gedolah.
Okay, so the next part of our conversation, I want to follow up just on that point. So primarily, we go to work to make money. have an income, to feed our families. That's the baseline. And the question that I start to think about then really revolves, ironically, around chalent. If I want to learn how to make a chalent in a way which is okay, al pi halacha, so I'll open up a Shulchan Aruch, a Mishnah Berurah. If I don't understand it, I'll ask a Rav who is competent enough to understand these concepts and to explain them to me. So that's one realm of our religious worldview. If I eat too much chalent and I end up with a really bad stomach ache, so I will go to a doctor. The doctor may or may not be Jewish. It doesn't really matter as long as he understands the secular scientific knowledge that will help me cure my stomach bug from eating too much chalent. That's what matters to me. So when it comes to making money, doing business, having a career that will be that ma'ala gedola, how do we think about this? Am I supposed to be looking for career advice in Pirkei Avos, in secular books and TED Talks? How do we think about that negotiation and that conversation?
A great question. I think the first thing I would want to just try and recalibrate a little bit. I think one has to think of going into the workforce not just to make money. It's to make money the way the Rebbeinu Shem designed the world. And the way the Rebbeinu Shem designed the world is you make money out of serving other people. You make money out of chesed. You make money out of doing something for people that they're not able to do themselves as efficiently as you can do for them. So there needs to be, it's not just I'm going to make money, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to serve, and we can talk about that as well. But to get that idea is, and therefore career advice now becomes important. It's not about just taking the job that will pay me the most. You also want to take a job that's going to allow you to continue developing yourself as a human being. And there are some jobs, I'm not even talking about how much time the job takes, just the nature of the work. Some work will be soul destroying for one individual and will be nourishing for a different individual. How does one find the right fits? And there you come to the career choice. On the question of the difference between Torah and Chokhmah, so Chokhmah begoim tamin. We believe that the non-Jewish world, the secular world, has a lot of access to wisdom, to facts and information that are very, very helpful. Torah begoim al tamin, Torah among the goyim don't believe in. And I spent many years pondering that. How do you know the difference? When is it Torah and when is it Chokhmah? What are the guidelines? And it was actually when I came across the Cheshbon HaNefesh. The Cheshbon HaNefesh was written in the 18th century by Menachem Mendel Lapin, a name similar to mine but not the same at all. Menachem Mendel Lapin was a maskil. So he was a Ben Torah who started studying secular work. He became a mathematician and studied medicine, various other things. The maskilim, the secularists considered him as a religious Jew, and the religious Jews saw him as a secularist. So he was in that kind of dangerous middle path. He wrote the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh. I got a hold of an old edition, a very old edition of the Cheshbon HaNefesh, and in the Hakdama, in his introduction, I found a piece that isn't in the later editions. They censored it out of the later editions. In it, he says he's just come across a method in the Western world that is amazing, and he's built the Sefer HaCheshbon HaNefesh on that methodology. That methodology happens to have been the methodology of Benjamin Franklin. He doesn't mention Benjamin Franklin by name, but it is Benjamin Franklin. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter later republishes the Cheshbon HaNefesh because he sees it as such an important work. A Rosh Yeshiva once asked me, how does that work? Why would he be taking Musar and Torah ideas from Benjamin Franklin, and why would Rabbi Yisrael Salanter be republishing it? And my answer to him was, because method is Chokhmah. How to do something is Chokhmah. That's wisdom, that's knowledge, that's information. What to do and why to do it is Torah. So to keep healthy is a mitzvah of the Torah. As the Rambam says, that it's midarke Hashemu. To keep healthy is midarke Hashemu. That's part of Torah. But the Rambam also paskins on the basis of the Gemara that you're not allowed to live in a city where there's no doctor. If you're ill, you need a physician, not a rabbi. So how to heal, that you need to be healthy is Torah. How to be healthy, you go to the specialists in those areas. The same thing here, whether to earn a living or not, that's Torah. When it comes to how to earn a living, the why you're earning a living, that's Torah. What mindset? How does it fit in? What part of your life is it? What's your worldview? That's Torah. But how to earn a living, there you ask career advice from the people who know, which doesn't mean that you don't have a parallel relationship with Talmidei Chachamim, with a Rov, that you might discuss and say, I was advised such and such. What do you think about it? You can always check these things up. But when it comes to the how to, go to the specialists. When it comes to the what or the why, only through Torah itself.
Okay, and you opened up that insight by talking about chesed, which is very interesting because we oftentimes think about chesed in terms of nonprofit works and tzedakah, but you said that your career should be built on the ideas of chesed, and yet maybe a business scholar, might say that the world economy is built off of profit and making money. So how do you think about that?
So Avrom Grudzinski, among others, in I think his sefer is called Toras Avrom, I think, speaks about the fact that chesed does not mean that you don't benefit. We benefit from the chesed that we do. On the contrary, Torah is built on such a way that the world, the olam, is built in such a way that you are rewarded for the service you provide. That's the way it is. Even in Torah itself, there's schar mitzvahs. At the end of the day, there's schar mitzvahs. We're not supposed to do the mitzvahs for the schar, but there is schar mitzvahs. The fact is, we do benefit from the mitzvahs that we do. We benefit in Olam Hazeh and we benefit in Olam Haba. There is benefit. So Rabbi Avram Grudzinski and many others make it very clear that a person who's in business is a massive Baal Chesed. The fact that he is gaining profit from doing that doesn't belittle the Chesed. Because that's the nature of what we do. We can be planting trees for future generations. We'll benefit from that as well. That doesn't mean that you're not doing a chesed for future generations. So I think it's important to separate this out, this idea that chesed has to be only altruistic. No, chesed is when you're doing something in the service of someone else, when you're putting somebody else's interests before your own. That you also get a benefit from it. That's normal. And that's a principle that I've used in advising all the businesses that I advise. Focus your strategy on the difference you're making to people. Don't focus it on the amount of money that you're earning. Focusing on the amount of money that you're earning is like playing tennis and focusing on the scoreboard. You'll miss the ball every time. If you're playing tennis, you hit the ball, or any sport. If you're doing it right, the score will go up. You will score. If you're not scoring, you better check. Maybe you're not doing it right. But you focus on the service. Focus on what you're doing for people. Focus on the chesed. Focus on your customer. Put your customer first. Do something for them that they're grateful for, that they're willing to pay for. That's how you make money. When somebody says, what you did for me is worth so much more than what you're charging me. That's chesed. And that's how a person is able to make money in an honest way.
Can you give an example of a business that you helped make that shift?
Oh, just about every business in which I work. So, well, let's take an example. We could look at we had a situation. This is back in the days in South Africa, where Coca-Cola had been in South Africa during the apartheid years. Pepsi-Cola withdrew. After apartheid, when Nelson Mandela was released, Pepsi announced with a lot of fanfare they were coming back to South Africa, and Coca-Cola was terrified because the black population of South Africa, which was by far the majority, were just waiting for Pepsi to come back to reward them for having moved out of South Africa during the apartheid wars, and they were angry at Coca-Cola for having stayed there all that time. And we worked with Coca-Cola. It was in that time that Coca-Cola engaged us to actually redefine what it is that they do, what is it that they're providing, and who is the beneficiary. Always look, when it comes to chesed, always focus on who is the beneficiary, who are you benefiting. And in their case, it was quite interesting because we discovered that their beneficiary is not the person drinking the Coke. That's the beneficiary of the retail store that sells it. The real beneficiaries are the retail stores. You're providing parnosa to the retail stores. You're enabling them to sell a product that is well marketed and loved and adored throughout the world. You're giving them a presence and changing their relationship with the little retail store owners, just the little guys who had these little makolets and stores on the corners, thousands and thousands of them all over the country, teaching them and helping them to change their relationship with them, that they saw them as their customer and they were focused on what can I do to you to elevate your business, to make your business successful. It was one of the pieces that they did that was really important.
So what would that look like? What would the company do with the retail store to help them and provide value to them?
Firstly, building relationship between the man who delivers and the store owner. So now your delivery man becomes a key frontliner. It's not just dumping a number of cases of Coke on the doorstep. It's actually engaging with the person, helping them helping him merchandise it correctly, helping him put it in the right places, talking to him a little bit about his life and some of his challenge and what he's doing, building up relationships with him that becomes so very important. And in other businesses too, one of the very interesting clients we have is actually a gaming business. One would think, what would a Rav be doing consulting to a gaming business? But it's a very ethical gaming business in many, many ways. And one of the things there also that we taught them was to see that what they're providing is not an opportunity for gambling. In fact, they restrict people's gambling. When they see people gambling above their abilities, they actually stop their accounts. But what their main thing is providing entertainment and company for people who are terribly lonely. And they redesigned their entire casinos, all of them, around the idea of providing companionship and environment for lonely people, because that was the majority of their client base we discussed. Their customers were lonely people sitting at home on their own. And so the whole atmosphere changed. And they became probably the most profitable casino in North America, one of the most profitable, because they completely changed their model when they realized this is not about gambling. This is not even about gaming. Gaming is just one of the vehicles we use to provide a sense of importance and belonging and companionship to people who are terribly lonely. And it gave the workers a lot of pride. Instead of saying, I work at a casino, I work at a gaming company, each employee started realizing, I work at providing happiness, comfort, company, and a welcoming environment to people who are otherwise terribly lonely. And they were trained then in how to do that, how to relate to their customers humanly, not just transactionally.
Are you allowed to mention the name of that company, or it's not for public?
Yeah, it's available on our website, so I can. It's Wind Creek Hospitality. It's a group of American Indians, actually. It's Native Americans. And they have done an incredible piece of work in building out. They were a very, very poor tribe of Native Americans, very, very poor. And they built up this incredible business and now have many, many businesses way beyond the gaming business. But the whole thing was and still is constructed on the idea of chesed. Use our tangible offering. Every business has a tangible offering, the commodity you're selling. That's only a vehicle through which to offer people something intangible and truly valuable that they really seek and that they really want. And whether we're working with a bank or we're working with in this case, this hospitality company, or we're working with hospitals, or we're working with technology companies, it's always that's the crucial part, is discover what part of your business is the tangible commodity, what is the intangible chesed, and how do you marry those two efficiently.
Wow. And when you were talking before, you mentioned that within the infinite possibilities of a person doing chesed, making a career built off of finding different values to deliver to different peoples and businesses, you mentioned that some people might find a certain industry soul nourishing. I believe that was your term. And some people find that completely soul draining. And that leads to the question, is it utopian to try to find a job where I both feel my own self-fulfillment, my soul reaching its full potential, and also being able to provide value and make the world a better place? Is that utopian, or is that practical? Is that something that I should be looking for on a daily basis, or maybe bigger picture, long-term, I'll gain enough leverage to get to that space?
Very important there. And again, people are different, and one has to acknowledge the difference. There are people who just love making money. And I mentioned to you in our last conversation, there's a danger in that because one can be so drawn into the business world that one actually does leave Torah, one leaves Yeshiva, as we said in the beginning. But if one isn't such a person, if one's saying, look, my passion is Torah and learning, teaching Torah, I want parnos, and I want to earn my parnos in an honest way, which means I'm doing something that is a chesed to the world or to other people, and something that is nourishing to me, or at least not soul-destroying to me. That becomes important because you're going to be spending 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 hours a day on your parnosa. And to be doing something that is soul-destroying in that period of time will destroy your soul. It does eat away at you. So it's terribly important that the environment in which you're working and the type of work you're doing is one which is suited to your purpose, to why you're in this world. When the Mesilas Yesharim opens up and says, Yesod HaChasidut v'shorish avodat v'imah hu she'yitpareh v'yitamet etzel adam, the whole foundation of everything is to be absolutely clear. Ma chovato be'olamo. what is a person's duty and obligation in the world, what you should place your attention, what should be your goal and your ambition in everything that you do. And then he goes on to talk about Klal Yisrael as a unit, what the Jewish people's purpose is. But that also applies to the individual. It's important for you to be able to articulate, what do you believe Hashem has put you in this world to do? And there again, Yaakov, we do that with every one of our clients, thousands and thousands of clients around the world, most of them non-Jewish. One of the first things we do is we take them through a process that we've developed, which is actually based on the Chovas Halvovos, to determine, what did Hashem put you in this world to do? And even people who don't believe in Hashem, we don't do this work as faith work, as religious work, it's business. And so for many people, you don't even have to talk about Hashem. We just say, what were you put in this world to do? And nearly everybody I've ever dealt with understands that one has been put here for a specific purpose, whether they believe in God or they don't. Certainly we who do believe in Hashem, how much more so? Hashem had a plan for you. He wants you to, you're here to accomplish something, to do something, to make a difference in a certain way. So it's important to articulate that, to know what your purpose in the world is, to have it clear in front of you. And I have mine written out, and it's in front of me on my table. I use it all the time to check that I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And also your sense of values, to know what your specific values are, not just your general Torah values that we all believe in, but what are yours? What are your values? And then to make sure that the work that you're considering aligns with that. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it enables you to fulfill your purpose. It's aligned with your values. It doesn't require you to compromise who you are at your core and at your essence. That's important. And for you to be able to articulate in what way you're using your job as a way to serve people. And whether it's like Rabbi Yochanan Asandler and others, whether you're making shoes for people, or you're solving, real difficult business or mathematical problems for people, it doesn't matter. If you're doing something for people, you're in a chesed space, and you're developing your neshama instead of becoming soul-destroyed.
And the way you described having a mission and a purpose, and you said that you have yours written down on a piece of paper, I guess I'm wondering if that is also somewhat of a high expectation and a high bar to set for people. And I'm wondering, like, when we talk about the definition of success, so I could say that I'm able to go through a certain process and have a definition on a piece of paper and a strategy that will get me there. That's a very clean and neat vision. And maybe you'll tell me that I should be doing that. But maybe the alternative is life is not always so clear, and there's a lot of fluidity and there's a lot of messiness. And maybe this expectation of having a clear-cut path and strategy and goals in life is maybe a little bit too much to ask versus, I don't know, this is life. You sort of got to do what you got to do. You got to roll forward. You got to take care of your kids. You got to bring it to an income, and without thinking too neatly and carefully about these goals. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that you're right. And today more than ever, because things change so fast, that even businesses are realizing that 3-year plans or 5-year plans are not very useful because they seldom work out that way. Tom Peters, one of the fathers of modern business strategy, told me years ago that he offered $100 at that time. He said to anybody who can show him a strategic plan that was actually implemented. And he said he's never had to pay $100 because it's difficult to do that. We have no control over the outcome of what we do. That's where Emunah and Bitochen comes in. We have no control over that. We only can control the input, what we do. So when we're talking about success, we need to leave success open. One thing that I've learned, Yaakov, is that Hashem's definition of your success is 1,000,000 times bigger than your definition will ever be. So if you're going to define your success, you're cheating yourself out of a lot of potential. So when we do that, when we decide what success looks like for us, we're just saying to Hashem, you don't have to give us that much, just give us, what our little minds can conceive of. Because sometimes Hashem has a very different picture, sometimes bigger, sometimes just different. And we have to be open to those opportunities. We have to realize I'm going down this road, but that might not be the road that I'll end up going down. You might remember there was a Rav Galinsky is no longer alive. He wrote Sifrei Musar. He was a darshan, and he told the story. I don't think it was his own. I've since seen it elsewhere, but I had him speak in my shul in South Africa many years ago, and he tells the story of big fish chase little fish. I don't know if you've heard it or your listeners have heard it. Big fish chase little fish, So one would expect if you catch a big fish and you open it up, you would find the little fish in the throat of the big fish with their tails down backwards and their mouths outside, because the big fish would have come and caught them from behind. But that's not what you find. You find it the other way around. They come into the fish head first. And he says the reason is because the big fish are chasing little fish, but they never catch them. What they catch are fish they weren't even chasing. They're opening their mouths ready to catch the little fish, and other fish come swimming into their mouths. And business is like that too, and life is like that. You've got to chase. You've got to go. Liridov is something that one has to do at certain stages of one's life. You've got to go after things, and you've got to know what you're going after. But you've also got to know that what you're going after might not be what you're going to get, that you're going to get something completely different. So when we talk about defining success, I think all you can do is work on with guardrails. These are my values. So if I have to move outside of my values, that's not success for me. This is my purpose. If I can't fulfill my purpose, and the purpose is defined in broad ways, not in specific ways, but if I can't make a difference in the world in the areas of my own talents and capabilities, that would hardly be successful. But exactly what that success looks like and where I'm going to make that, who knows what's going to be. I need to be very open to every possibility that gets thrown my way.
Okay, what do you think are the key factors to gaining and retaining meaningful employment in the years ahead? And I want to maybe throw in like maybe a question that should come before that, is that you mentioned how fast the world is changing, and that's something very interesting, and you've been thinking about that a lot. You even mentioned it last time. But there are those who say, there's a recent book that came out by Morgan Housel, which says that actually people tend to overthink how much the world is changing, and really a lot of keys to success are a lot broader and ancient and stand the test of time a lot more than we give them credit for. So maybe that would be like the first question is, what do you think that we should be throwing out the book on career success and developing totally new ones for the age of generative AI, or focusing on ancient wisdom or older business wisdom? And then what do you think those key things are for me going forward into my career?
And both are right. The tagline of our business is timeless wisdom, timely strategies. You've got to work with the timelessness and the timeliness, because if you don't have them both, it becomes very, very difficult. So the environment is changing very fast. The nature of work is changing. There are a lot of things that are changing very fast, and one has to be able to readjust and adapt to that. But some of the yasodas, some of the foundations of business are the same, and people who don't realize that miss out a lot of opportunity too. And that is, at the end of the day, business is done between people. That business is about chesed, business is about relationships, business is about communication. So those things don't change, no matter what technology there is. On the contrary, the more technologically sophisticated we become, the more value there is to basic human relationships. So I think when it comes to employment and meaningful employment, I think that there are five pieces of advice, or five principles that I teach. The first is understanding that we're put in this world to serve. La'ovda or l'shomra, yes, Chazal say that means about serving Hashem and learning Torah, and that's one meaning of la'ovda l'shomra. But la'ovda l'shomra has a much more universal sense as well. It also just means looking after Gan Eden, looking after the garden. That's already a drush to say that it's talking about Torah. In other words, we're put here to serve. Who we serve is our choice. We're put here to serve Hashem. We're put here to serve our families. We're put here to serve our customers. We're in service. And when a person is in service, they're at their best. If you're here to make a difference to whoever, to do something, to make a contribution, then we're at our best and we're at our highest. When we're here to take, we're at our lowest, and it's the most unhealthy situation. So the first thing is to realize I'm in this for service. The second one we've touched on already is aligning our own values and purpose with the work that we're doing. Taking a job with a company that you can be yourself, a company you don't have to be somebody else. Of course, you've got to adapt. Of course, you've got to fit in, but not by compromising who you are at your source. A kind of work, number three, I think, is that allows you efficient use of time, a time to income ratio. If you have the choice, if you don't have the choice, of course you don't, but if you have the choice, you want the kind of job that doesn't require you to work 15 hours a day, where you can be efficient and earn a good enough living in that time. Part of the idea of service and love of the Shom is putting your customer first. Just in whatever job that you are, your employer needs to know that you put the customer first. And then there's a piece of advice that a client of mine and a friend who was a CEO of a very large international bank said to me, the only thing I look for in employing people are two midot. The midah of urgency, zrizut, and the midah of caring, which I guess is chesed in a way. I just want people who care and who have a sense of urgency because I can't teach them that. Everything else I can teach them. But I look at the sense of urgency. I look in the way they walk. I look in the way they speak. Is there an energy? Is there a sense of I'm going somewhere, I'm doing something? And is there a caring? Do they notice the people around them and are they empathetic to the people around them? Those are the two most important things. So I guess there too, and that's another way of looking at work. When I said to you at the outset, to look at it as an integrated way, not of leaving yeshiva and going to work. This is an integrated life of a Ben Torah, where there's kfiyus itim l'Torah. I'm going to be learning. I'm going to be teaching Torah, growing in Torah, and I'm going to be working and earning a living. And I'm going to be developing my personality and my character in both those areas. Of course, I'm going to develop myself as I continue learning, but I'm also going to develop myself in my work. I'm going to get more empathy. I'm going to learn more how to be focused on chesed. I'm going to learn more how to develop a sense of urgency, which I might not have had to have in the yeshiva world. So the business world, the professional world confronts me with the type of challenges that force my personal character and spiritual growth as well.
Let's just review that because that was a lot of very important information. So principle number 1 is to have a service mentality of the Shamra. Value number 2 is aligning yourself, your values, and your work. Number 3 is having an efficient time to income ratio. Number 4 is zrizus, a sense of urgency. And number 5 is putting your customers first, which sort of circles back to 1, but is a little more developed and customer centric.
That number 4, urgency and caring. Okay,
the urgency and caring. The urgency doesn't trample the caring, but it complements the caring.
That's it. That's exactly.
Right. So I think the last topic I want to touch on today is really going deeper into number 2 about values aligning. And in your book that you wrote, Lead by Greatness, I can't recommend it highly enough. You're writing to business leaders, to CEOs, and you talk about how their spirituality, their unique identity and set of values can set the tone for an entire organization, which I believe is very, very true. But for me, as a junior starting my first job at the lowest rungs of society, it's a little bit of of the business world. It's a little bit of a scary thought, especially when you contrast the fact that I'm learning yeshiva where basically everything is completely calibrated with my Torah lifestyle and Torah values. So the idea of going into an organization where, okay, I'll try to find some alignment, but in the end of the day, unless Rav Chaim Kanievsky is my CEO, there's going to be some tension there.
Yes, absolutely. And welcome to the real world. So that's so in that sense, that yeshiva's preparation for the real world. One needs a time where you are insulated, where you're able to just grow and develop without having to worry about these dissonances between oneself and the world around. But the real world is not that. We see as we start in the very first pages of the Chumash, we go through the life of Noach, of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, just everything is the story of the tension between the values around us and our own values and managing that tension. And the important thing is this, the real starting point is to know your own values and to have that very, very clear. And by knowing your own values, it's not just what your values are. We discovered something really interesting in my work, and that was that there is no big difference in the values of a tzaddik and a criminal. By that I mean, if one were to say to the tzaddik, what are the important midas by which you want to raise your children? And you say to the criminal, what are the midas by which you want to raise your children? The lists are not that far off from one another. Honesty and integrity and fairness. Even the criminal doesn't want to raise their children to be criminals. So that's not the difference. The difference between people is what you're willing to be moser nefesh for. That's really what makes a difference for somebody. Yes, honesty is a value. Are you willing to be moser nefesh for value, for honesty? Fairness is a value. Are you willing to be moser nefesh for fairness? Learning, growing is a value. Are you willing to be moser nefesh for growing? And when there's a clash between values, where being honest and being fair don't go together that well, which one takes precedence? So knowing how to work with your values becomes a very first starting point. You need to be very secure in yourself. When you, I don't mean you, I mean one, when we are very secure in who we are. We have very clear identity. We can manage the diversity and variances of values of the people around us because they don't shake us. So one of the first things in going into this big world is to be very clear on what your values are as an individual. Not just a Ben Torah's values and have a generic set of values that everybody has got, but what are your values? In what way are you different from anybody else? And in Lead by Greatness, we call it a spiritual fingerprint, because I discovered no two people have got the same one. None of us treat values the same way. And that's what makes us uniquely different. And each person needs to understand. And there again, we have a methodology to help people discover what their own unique system of values is. How do I work with values? And what makes that unique? So to have that very clear becomes a primary requirement for going into this world. And then being able to understand that that's different from everybody else around you, and to be able to respect that the values of the people around you are different. You don't have to change them. They don't have to be aligned to you. They've got their own values. When it comes to you being asked to do something that compromises who you are, that's where it becomes difficult but clear. But otherwise, you're going to be working with people whose view of the world is very different from yours. And that's part of the excitement of going into the world, is learning how they see the world and how different it is, and not being threatened by it. It's okay if you see the world differently. That's what makes the world interesting.
So you mentioned Mesiras Nefesh, and I think it's a very profound terminology to use. And I oftentimes find myself these days paying tribute to my brother-in-law, Zichron Livracha, Hashem Yikon Damo, who was actually Moser Nefesh in Gaza just a couple weeks ago. But I'm not bothered by the fact that you invoke Mesiras Nefesh, because I do think that living a Torah lifestyle in today's world is really, really hard and takes some very serious sacrifices. So without taking away from the ultimate Mesiras Nefesh, I think that is a very interesting way of putting it. And maybe you want to just give me like some chizuk, or just to double down on that, about how we're being asked to be Moser Nefesh by being asked to stay strong in our Torah values, even though it's really, really hard.
Yeah, sure. And you're right. The idea of Mesiras Nefesh is a spectrum. Getting up in the morning early for Shachris, or to learn before Shachris, is Mesiras Nefesh. And giving one's life for the protection of Am Yisrael is Mesiras Nefesh. And you can't compare the one with the other, and yet they're both on the spectrum of Mesiras Nefesh, because you're sacrificing something with each little thing or big thing that we do. And if you think of it in the way that a person, take a frum person, a Yoreh Shemayim, a Ben Torah, goes into the business world, and his midos and his emunah gets chipped away little by little. And eventually, after a number of years, he doesn't have it anymore. It's interesting. It reminds me of, I spoke to my Rosh Yeshiva before I, so to say, left the yeshiva, went into the world of work, and asked him for his advice and what he thought. We had a very interesting conversation. One of the things he told me was that Vysotsky, the man who started the tea business, was a Talmid Chacham, and he decided to go into business and start a tea business. And he told them, I forget who it was that he was speaking to, and what period of time. It might have been Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, I don't remember. And he said, and I think as I dish out the tea, because I'll be a wholesaler, I'll have these vats of tea, and I'll be filling people's containers. And as I'm filling them, I'll talk to them about matters of emunah and midos and Torah, and I'll give divrei Torah, and that way I'll be able to continue teaching people. And he said to him, Mr. Vysotsky, and what will happen if while you're filling their tea bags, they teach you a little bit of their kefirah, they teach you a little bit of their worldview, and little by little you start learning a lot of their worldview. And that's the danger of being in the outside business world. So if somebody does that, and 5 years later you suddenly discover you don't have a Ben Torah anymore, you don't have a Ma'amin anymore, you don't have a Baal Midos anymore, you've lost somebody's life is gone. And to keep that life as a life of Kedusha in a world that can be inhospitable to Kedusha, that does require Mesiras Nefesh. You are giving up something in order to maintain and keep something. So I do think Mesiras Nefesh is the right word, bearing in mind, as you say, that there's this very big spectrum of what Mesiras Nefesh means, and that going into the world you're going into requires more Mesiras Nefesh than learning full-time. Staying and learning full-time also requires a lot of Mesiras Nefesh. There's no question that one is making enormous sacrifices to be in learning full-time. But it's a different type of Mesiras Nefesh when you go out and you're risking yourself in a sense, but if one's doing it with the right mindset and with the right worldview and with the right disciplines and seder in one's life, then there's an enormous amount of bracha. The Rebbeinu Shalom is there. There's siyata dishmaya. There's an enormous amount of help and support with somebody who's going into it l'shem shemayim in order to do the right thing, not just to make money.
Okay, so the last thing that I want to transition to for now is you mentioned this tool that you developed to help people, and you also mentioned midos, and I think sometimes to the Gra, who the opening to the Evan Shlema is where the Gra talks about one of the most fundamental things in our life is the idea of midos, and you mentioned this idea of helping a person develop their midos and their unique personality. So maybe tell us a little more about that tool, and maybe can you talk to me a little bit about how I can start thinking about that in the context of my current transition from being someone who just sits and learns and does a little bit of stuff on the side to really being in the workforce in a more substantive way.
So the idea there of midas in business to me was very, very important, because one of the questions I always had, going back many, many years, is why the Rebbeinu Shalom built business into the world, why he put money into the world, why he didn't just let each person live their life and learn Torah and not have to deal with one another. And likewise, why relationships, why men and women. And I imagined to myself a world where there were no gender relationships and there was no business, what peace there would be in the world. Because what do people fight about? Those are the things people fight about. And I realized that those are the two things that build character, that build midas. In a relationship, in a marriage, if you're self-centered, if you're selfish, if you're putting yourself first, you feel it very quickly. You get the message very quickly that this isn't okay. And the same applies in business. If you're putting yourself before your customer, if you're putting yourself before your investors, if you're putting yourself before your employees, before your team, you get the message very quickly. You start seeing the numbers. You start learning very quickly. You're on the wrong tracks. So business is actually a midos molder, if one wants to use it that way, and if one wants to be alert to it and not use it in a self-centered way, in a greedy way. And more than that, I discovered in some research that I did many years ago that where there is an investment in midos on the part of business leaders, their financial results are far superior, and in a sustainable way. We did a lot of research in that area and then built our whole practice on that. So what we do with businesses is that in the leadership development is developing leaders' midos. How can you be an effective leader not only in spite of your midas, but in fact because of your midas, and be able to build people and develop people that way. So then we had to develop methodology, and one of the things we developed is what I've called the leadership fingerprint, or the spiritual fingerprint, which is a way of mapping out how you work with midas yourself. Which are your uncompromising midas? Which are the midas you'll sometimes compromise if you have to? How do you trade them off one against the other where there's a necessity to do that? When to be kind to somebody, you can't be honest. If you tell them what they really look like, you'll hurt them. And to be honest with them, you're not going to be kind. Which is more important to you, kindness or honesty? How do you work with midas? So we developed this mapping of the fingerprint, which we've just put into a digital form. So now people can actually do it online. So instead of 4 or 5 coaching sessions, which cost a few $1,000s, they can now do it online for pennies. And sometimes with a coaching session there afterwards to help them actually understand their fingerprint and how to use it in work. So we've just now released this to enable people to be able to do it on large numbers. And I think for Ben Torah, this is going to be something particularly useful and valuable. And I invite you to try it out, and we can talk about it once you have and actually see how it would work for you in your life.
Okay, I'm excited to go through the test, and I look forward to analyzing with you next week.
Thank you, Yaakov. Thank you very much.